Ladies and gentlemen, let us go. I'm going to do this entire unit over here in under 15 minutes. I've got a timer over there that's telling me how much time remains. It's counting down like in Mission Impossible. Boom, 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 or something like that. Okay? Video's in black and white if you're wondering why, because when it's in color, the light refractive business in my glasses shines blue. It makes me look even more like an alien. Don't need any help in that category. So there you have it. If you're wondering, where are we? This is the Holiday Family Office. That's my lovely wife Rosemarie's side over there. This is my side over here. I have my study guide, and let us begin. The large issue throughout this unit is the issue of federal government power and how much the federal government can do. We've been following that theme throughout our study, whether or not we were talking about Hamilton's financial plan, or whether or not the government had the right to purchase Louisiana under Jefferson, or even if we want to talk about Andrew Jackson and chasing off the Native Americans. All of those are issues that showed the federal government in action and not the states. When the Civil War ends, slavery is no longer the major American topic, and the new topic is citizenship. What is it that you, the average American, can expect from your federal government? Starting off with our first question, the radical Republicans in Congress would say, what you can expect from your government is the federal government using its power and its wealth in order to ensure your full integration into life. The radical Republicans believed that that was the goal of the Civil War, to enact change upon the South. You lost the institution of slavery, and now we are going to fundamentally change the framework of the South. On the other hand, President Andrew Johnson would say that's not the goal. Johnson would say the South lost the war, they lost slavery, and that's where federal power really ended. Once the Southern states were readmitted, once they had accepted the 13th and perhaps even the 14th Amendment, if that's when they came in, that's all they had to do. The battle between the two rages back and forth. The Congress is going to pass the Civil Rights Act. Johnson's going to veto it. They're going to override his veto. The Congress is going to create the Freedmen's Bureau to look out for African Americans living in the South, the 4 million freedmen down there. Johnson's going to veto that. They're going to override it. A 14th Amendment is created to protect individuals and assure equal access to the law for every American, and Johnson's going to speak out against that. Now, eventually Johnson's going to be impeached, but not removed. The central point for us being, though, that that struggle is going to continue throughout. I move on to the next question. And this is not something that was legislated. The system of sharecropping is not something that was the law. It was just how things worked out. You had a group of people who owned the land, the predominant white Southern planter class. You had a group of people who had worked the land in the past, the freedmen of the South, and although slavery had ended, largely they fell into the same roles of working the land for the white class. Now, they did so under this new system for a share of the crop, so they would work the whole field and then receive a share of the crop instead of getting perhaps nothing as they had in the past, but it still is a system that's fraught with problems. People often racked up debt. It led to generational debt in which families were tied to the land for long periods of time. And that's going to be the real economic structure until after the 20th century begins. And we'll see a lot of Southern freedmen escaping the system and heading north into factory jobs. As I go down my list and I look at the chart here, on the left-hand side, we see the steps taken by the North. We've already mentioned the 14th Amendment. We've mentioned the Freedmen's Bureau. We've also talked about the fact that as an entire group, the Congress is trying to push as much legislation through in order to help Southern freedmen. Now, that's going to be countered by, in the far right portion of this chart, the Southerners and their resistance. Sometimes that resistance is going to be slow and plodding, like Redeemers, average Southerners who just didn't want to change the system. Sometimes it's going to be violent. Nathan Bedford Forrest and the KKK burning down churches, burning crosses, intimidating people so that they don't vote. All of that's an important part of the way that the South is going to try and hold back on any liberal change for the Southern society. Going to the voting rights portion of it, the 15th Amendment is created to try and give African American men the right to vote. Southerners are going to find loopholes in that. They'll use literacy tests and they'll use poll taxes where they're charging you to vote. And in doing so, they're going to make it tougher and tougher for African Americans to vote. Now let's spend a moment with this because this shows up on the test. When African Americans in the South vote, they vote Republican. The Republican Party is the party of the Civil War, the party of Lincoln, the party of the 13th, the 14th, the 15th Amendment, the Freedmen's Bureau. African Americans, if they vote Republican, which means that in southern states you could get a lot of Republican representation in Congress. You could also get states being run by Republicans, and as a result of it, you're going to have that liberal movement towards change. On the other hand, if African Americans don't vote, what you're going to end up with is a lot of Democratic Party votes. And as a result of that, I beg your pardon, rule of the state by the Democrats, who are going to be more loyal to the old ways of the South. So oftentimes the key is whether or not there's federal protection for voting. Is there a federal set of troops there manning the polling stations protecting African American votes? If there are, African Americans will probably vote. They will probably vote Republican. And as a result of it, the state will show liberal change. If they are not, African Americans may be afraid to vote, or they may not be able to vote. And as a result of it, you're going to get more and more possibility of the Democratic Party ruling those areas. Flipping the page. Reconstruction ends in 1877 for a few reasons. One of them is the inability of the North to ever really convince the South that things should change. Number two, stiff Southern resistance to the ways of reconstructing the South. They consistently put up enough of an opposition, whether we're talking about Redeemers or the Klan or literacy tests or poll taxes. Change was just not going to happen, and eventually Northerners lost the appetite for things. They just lacked enthusiasm for spending the money. The real precipitant is the election in 1876, where the Republicans and the Democrats both claim to have won the election. When the Republicans are declared the victors, the Republicans remove the last of the troops from the southern states, and the Democratic Party takes over control of the South. If you're an African American living in the South, unfortunately, this begins what's sometimes called the dark, long night of Reconstruction. Okay? Now, the next question, Plessy versus Ferguson. The case of Plessy versus Ferguson is meant to knock down or test Jim Crow laws. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. The Supreme Court in Plessy versus Ferguson rules that separate but equal accommodations comply with the ideas of the 14th Amendment. That means that southern states were allowed to practice segregation as long as the facilities were separate, or I beg your pardon, as long as they were equal if they were separate. Now, they're definitely going to be separate. They may not well be equal. We understand that. But there's not much that Southern freedmen can do to get those grievances really redressed in that situation. What to do with that then? Booker T. Washington is going to argue for a more gradual pace of reform in dealing with that. Put our head down, work hard. Washington gets a lot of criticism for this. People call him an accommodationist, they call him a sellout, but Washington would tell you that the key is this. White America cares most about money, and we need to show how important we are in that system of making money. If we do that, then eventually we'll earn the respect necessary in order to hold our heads up and be considered equals. On the other hand, on the right-hand side of our study guide, we've got W.E.B. Du Bois, who would say to you that that is malarkey. The 14th Amendment provides no exceptions, none. Nowhere does it say that African Americans need to wait or to sit aside or to be patient in any way. Du Bois is part of a group of people who found the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. He believes that African American society is equally capable of achieving what white society has achieved. He proposes this idea of the talented 10th, of putting forward the most talented African American young men and women in order to show that they, with the right background, with the right education, with the right opportunity, could achieve just as much as white society. And in showing that, that should lead to more allowances for equality across the board. Major switch, right? That is to say, big drop off as far as the topic goes. We leave the South behind, we head out west, and we talk about major industries of the West like mining and cattle and eventually the railroads. That's where we're going to see a lot of people head out, and as a result of it, there's going to be this major push against the Plains Indians. The government policy towards the Indians has largely been, over time, push and push and push, and that continues here. As a part of the Dawes Act, Native American tribes that were not eliminated in war, were pushed onto reservations, and the hope was assimilated into American culture. By assimilated, we mean getting rid of that hyphenated American portion. We want Native Americans who live in log homes, not teepees. We want Native Americans who speak English, not native languages. We want Native Americans who are going to plant crops, not follow animals like the buffalo herd. You get the idea. The goal of assimilation was to try and bring about an Americanization of people. It's the same thing that's happening on other parts of the American coasts. We'll talk in a moment about the Chinese on the West Coast. It was happening with European immigrants who were arriving on the East Coast. It was a major American theme of the day. Okay. Important to also remember that as a part of this process, the buffalo herds in America get devastated. Okay. What's a homesteader? A homesteader is someone who takes advantage of government programs to take 160-acre plots of land. And on those plots of land, hopefully begin an American farm, perhaps growing crops, grazing animals, but beginning the process of settling the western states. These are territories at this point. We need to populate them, make them into states, and continue America all the way across the North American continent. Not easy work. The drought conditions, the blizzard conditions, the native attacks, it's not going to be easy. But overall, this is a group of people who eventually merge themselves into a very productive society. When they want to gather together, they gather together at the Grange, and that Grange, really a social club, becomes the forerunner of a political party called the Populists, or the People's Party. The People's Party represents for us the beginning of something we'll see a lot. Groups who thought that the federal government should do more in order to enact change. Like if we go back to the first part of this video, we see the federal government with the Freedmen's Bureau trying to help out African Americans in the South. And the Populist Party would say, okay, we need something like that, but for farmers. Do something for farmers. And part of the agenda is having the government take over control of railroad rates and interest rates to assure that farmers got a fair economic bargain. They also wanted to make sure that the federal government was watching out for the natural resources of the country, that the better looking parts of America were not destroyed by the carnivorous ways of American business. And lastly, they have this idea of free silver. The populists wanted to expand the money supply. Instead of just issuing money based on gold, they wanted to issue money based on silver as well. That was part of a plan to try and increase the amount of money in American circulation and hopefully increase prosperity. It's a dangerous thing to do because it could lead to inflation as well. The main proponent of it is William Jennings Bryan, a Nebraskan, who speaks vividly about how the poor people of America, the farmers of America, the working man in a factory in America have been taken advantage of by the wealthy capitalists of America. Bryan believes that it is the rightful thing for the government to look out for those people and to defend them. Now, last couple things on the study guide. The Chinese Exclusion Act is precisely what it sounds like. It was an act that forbade any future Chinese immigration into the United States. It was done in order to assure that there would be enough work for other folks. The Chinese were showing themselves to be a very difficult group to assimilate, and they were causing problems on the west coast of the United States where people were tired of large Chinese gangs taking all of the jobs. Lastly, John Muir and the Sierra Club. Muir is an early environmentalist and naturalist who believes that the federal government should step in, like the populists were arguing for, in order to protect the natural beauty of America. He's the founder of the Sierra Club. If you make your way up into Yosemite and Sierra areas, you can see a lot of stuff named after Muir. He's good buddies with Teddy Roosevelt. It's no coincidence that when we get to Roosevelt here in a few weeks, we'll see Teddy Roosevelt as the first American president to really set aside sizable chunks of land for natural preservation. We're under 15 minutes. I hope you're having a good day. Study up. Test should be pretty straightforward if you know what you're doing. Take care.